Well, it was only on November 27th, Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith signed a memorandum of understanding concerning a new pipeline project. But now the Liberal government is saying it cannot support a Conservative motion regarding the MOU. So to discuss this, I'm going to bring in Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley. Hello, Brian. Welcome back. Great to have you.
Hi, Jeanette. What a weird world we're living in right now.
Yeah. So, Brian, Pierre Poilievre and the federal Conservatives put forward a motion in support of the MOU between Ottawa and Alberta, and the Liberals come out to say they can't support it. So, how can this be?
What's weird is that the Conservatives lifted the wording of their motion directly from the Memorandum of Understanding, but they only focused on two specific points: the possibility of a pipeline and the possibility of a tanker ban carve out on the Northwest coast. So it's asking Parliament to say that you support these ideas while respecting the need to have full consultations with Indigenous groups. Why are the Liberals not able to support that? I mean, quite literally, it is word for word parts of the MOU, not the full MOU, but I'm sure the Liberals would find a way to say, no, we can't support that either if the Conservative forced to vote on it. They pulled the language regarding the tanker ban carve out, regarding the pipeline from the MOU. They included the same language about Indigenous consultations, but the Liberals say, this doesn't fully respect Indigenous rights. This is divisive. We cannot support this. We support the full MOU, but we couldn't possibly support this. They sent out Energy Minister Tim Hodgson. They sent out Corey Hogan, his parliamentary secretary, also a Calgary Liberal MP, a species that's as rare as hen's teeth. They sent out Toronto Liberal MP and Environment Minister Julie DeBruzen, and they sounded so bizarre and weak when they were saying they won't do this. And of course, then all through question period, the Liberals, last few days have not been willing to say that they support this. They just want to call it divisive, as if it's some magic word that repels everything that you're saying. Well, we're asking you to vote for your words, and your word back to us is divisive. It makes zero sense, but that's the way that it's happening with the Conservatives and the Liberals these days.
Interesting, for sure. Brian, the group Coastal First Nations was in Ottawa today to denounce the MOU, to oppose that Conservative motion. So you've been reporting, Brian, on this group, and you have pointed out that they may not be the type of group that they've been presented as. So what do you mean by that?
Well, it's very frustrating. When I first heard of Coastal First Nations, I thought, well, it has to be a specific band or group of bands who represent the Coastal First Nations. There are many Coastal First Nations, okay? But this specific group named Coastal First Nations, well, that's their operating as name. It's not their real name. Their real name is the Great Bear Society Initiative. And they were founded about 25 years ago, mostly with money from American foundations, from groups like the Tides Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Margaret A. Cargill Foundation. These are all foundations funded by billionaires out of the US who are opposed to Canadian resource development. And they gave the seed money to start up this Great Bear Society initiative. Why? To oppose logging, to oppose mining, to oppose pipelines, to oppose oil and gas. And now they call themselves Coastal First Nations. They say they represent a bunch of the First Nations communities in Haida Gwaii along the BC coast. Yeah, they probably have representation from some, but they don't have representation from all. And what they are is actually a not-for-profit based in Vancouver. They've got a downtown Vancouver address. That's where they're headquartered. They have a CEO. It's not a band and council, but they're always portrayed as if this is a band that you've got to deal with. No, this is an activist group. That is what they are. And they were founded, as I said, with American money as a not-for-profit to oppose any resource development in British Columbia. That's what they continue to do. And yet most of the media will treat them as if they are a band. So they held their news conference today. You know, The fact is, there were no adversarial questions asked. It was just layups after layup of softball questions thrown at this group, and they're treated as if they have a veto. They have no veto, and part of the reason why is they have no rights and they have no title. Now, there's some bands who are members of the group, uh, but doesn't mean they represent the whole community. So they can't have a veto on this. And by the way, even if they were a band, there's no jurisprudence that says they would have a veto on a pipeline.
Brian, you've also spoken to Conservative MP Ellis Ross, and now he represents the area around Kitimat where a pipeline could eventually end up. So, what is he telling you, and why does it matter?
It matters because, well, first off, he's the MP for the area. And then from 2017 to 2024, Ellis Ross was also the MLA for the area. And before that, he was a counselor, a band counselor, and then chief for the Haisla First Nation, which is the First Nation in and around the Kitimat area. Ellis Ross is fully on board with a pipeline, with removing the tanker ban. Um, and he says there are many people in First Nations communities that are. So let me go back to this group, Coastal First Nations. Um, Ellis told me that when he was on band council, they were part of this group, but they removed themselves because of they figured out that it was anti-development time after time. And what's he looking for? What are many looking for? The ability to have economic development for their people as opposed to relying on government handouts. But there are some who say, no, we should just, keep things as they are. Don't allow the, First Nations economic development. Why on earth would we want that? To go back to the Northern Gateway pipeline that the Trudeau government killed off in 2016. And a lot of people are saying, well, this Northwest pipeline should probably follow a route somewhat similar to Northern Gateway. There were 31 First Nations along the route of Northern Gateway that supported the project, that would have benefited from it economically. But do you know who opposed it? Coastal First Nations. And their then executive director, a guy named Art Starrett, he's since retired, but he was the executive director back in 2014 or so, before the Trudeau Liberals killed it, when the Harper government was still, moving forward with approving it. Art Starrett said that if anyone showed up with a shovel to start digging and allowing for this pipeline to go forward, he and his group of coastal First Nations would be opposed to it. 31 First Nations groups along the route supported it, but the activist group funded by Americans opposed it. So this is why you've got to talk to people like Ellis Ross, who come from their own communities, uh, represent a First Nations point of view, and he has been elected time and again as a band counselor, as a chief, as an MLA, as an MP to represent an area where they say, yes, we want this economic development, because he's not shy about telling you that that's what he supports.
Okay, so let's look to the U.S. for a second here. So, Donald Trump's ambassador to Canada has said any future deal between Canada and the United States will see more oil heading south. So, is oil the only Canadian product that Americans want? Because we've now seen reports of how Washington has tried to limit products like steel.
Yeah, it seems like oil is the only product that they want, or at least they want in abundance. So, Ambassador Pete Hoekstra, speaking with National Post, said that yes, he foresees any deal seeing a lot more oil come down. That's mainly from Alberta. I mean, a bit from Saskatchewan, but mainly from Alberta. We know that President Donald Trump has already approved again the cross-border portion of what was once known as Keystone XL pipeline. That was a project of TC Energy out of Calgary. TC Energy has since spun it off into a separate company called South Bow. We'll see if South Bow tries to go forward. I know that Premier Danielle Smith told me the day after the MOU was signed that she wants Keystone XL or a project like it to be revived so that that can go forward. But yes, on steel, on aluminum, on autos, Ambassador Pete was clear. They don't want that much of it. So, what would a potential future trade deal look like? Most likely, we would have a limit. So there, below that limit, there would be no tariffs on steel, on autos, on aluminum. Above that, there would be tariffs. So we're not going to have the same trade deal that we've ever had with the United States. And, in all my discussions with the Americans, that keeps coming through crystal clear. So say something like autos. Over the last 5 years, we've produced X number of cars that have been shipped down to the United States. We bought X number of cars from the United States. Okay, we're going to cap your exports at this. Anything above it, you're going to get a hefty tariff. That is kind of where they're at on all of these products, whether it's with Canada or elsewhere, because they want to rebuild their manufacturing base, and they feel that it's been taken away from them by bad policy by previous governments over the decades.
Brian, the headline on a recent column of yours was called Liberals Caught Between a Rock and the Bible on Hate Speech Law. So many in southern Alberta and across Canada signed petitions against Bill C9. So, what's the latest on this bill and why are religious leaders upset?
Well, so Bill C9 was going nowhere. This is the Liberals' weird attempt to deal with a couple of different things. We've seen some horrific protests, not just outside of, but at the front doors of synagogues and other places of worship. And we've got bubble zone laws for protests at hospitals in Canada, at abortion clinics, at things like that, where you say, no, no, you've got to step back. You've got to be a certain distance away. And so there was a push to say, let's bring that forward for places of worship like churches, mosques. But really, in this current climate, we're talking about synagogues where since October 7th, 2023, it's been pretty horrific. But they also added in some hate speech elements that were getting pushback from the conservatives because they said, well, like we're going down a slippery slope, from the NDP because, well, they back some of these groups that are, you know, I'm not going to say they back the terrorist groups, but they back the people that support the terrorist groups like Hamas. They don't want to be seen as offside the keffiyeh wearing Hamasniks. Um, and so the Liberals didn't have a dance partner. And then the Bloc Québécois came forward and they said, if you will get rid of the religious exemption from hate speech laws in Canada, we will back this. And the Liberals said yes, or at least Sean Fraser, the Justice Minister, said yes. Well, that could result in passages of the Bible being effectively banned or criminalized. Some traditional Christian teachings, uh, treated the same way. Traditional Jewish and Muslim and Buddhist and other teachings also treated the same way. I don't know who thought that bringing this forward just before Christmas, hey, let's ban parts of the Bible, whether it's Romans or Deuteronomy or Leviticus, let's ban parts of the Bible just before Christmas. Who thought that was a good idea? I don't know. The Bloc Québécois, which really wants this, and they want it because they point to a radical imam named Adil Sharkawi, who you may recall, there was a big story about him a couple of years ago. He was calling upon Allah to essentially kill his opponents, meaning Zionist Jews. Those were the terms that he was using, roughly speaking, translated out of Arabic. And there was a police investigation, and his response well, it was a prayer, and it was good faith religion. And the Bloc said, like, we've got to get rid of this. But the Bloc is also very anti-religion of all types, just as most of Quebec society is. And so they wanted rid of this, and they're trying to portray any opposition to it as far right wing religious zealots. Well, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, which let me tell you, does not follow that description. I mean, they're probably more left than right. They've written to Prime Minister Mark Carney, who is a church-going Catholic, and said, this is problematic. This could lead to an awful lot of issues. They're not the only religious group, but they are the biggest. And so the Liberals don't know what to do now. Apparently, Sean Fraser negotiated this deal with the Bloc without talking to the PMO. Now everything's on ice.
All right, Brian, we're out of time, but thanks so much for joining us today, Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley.
Thank you.